I guess I will get started. I'm going to give a very, very high level update on all the projects. It would take probably far too long to dive into super details, but if I gloss over something that you have a burning desire to know about, then please pop in a question or something like that. I snuck in a seventh project on Rob there, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But one of the things that I'm going to try to sort of go back and forth on in a not totally random order, but certainly not particularly ordered set is threading between the projects and the working groups. And hopefully by doing this, we can kind of see some of the trends that we've noticed in that having these projects be part of the Academy Software Foundation has really given, which, and some of this Rob alluded to with some of the common patterns about build and documentation, these sorts of things. Some of it's just even visibility, the fact that we have icons for these projects. But it's also the community and knowledge sharing, and so hopefully people will start to get a feel for how both the projects and the working groups really help build this community, which I think is super neat. So I thought I would start where we all started, which was with OpenEXR. OpenEXR, of course, had gone through a period of quiet. And then with the start of the Academy Software Foundation, it's had a vibrant revival. Most recently, we've been updating to that new common legal agreement that Rob talked about, which is that I believe that after all the projects finish updating, we will have all the projects on the same basic contributing license agreement, which is super awesome because it makes it easier for corporations to know how to contribute. The other thing that has been really great about the EXR sort of recent work has been with getting all of these build CI practices in place. We've also integrated with the OSS Fuzz project that's run by Google, and that has really increased the stability and security, for that matter, of the OpenEXR project. And when you have a project like OpenEXR running as a component in an operating system, it needs to be secure, and it needs to not allow random bad actors to take over your system. And so that's been a really great thing that has sort of flowed through the project in the last period of time. Currently, we're working on releasing OpenEXR 3.0, and I should say that OpenEXR 3.0 is really splitting the project into two pieces. There's the iMath library, which is becoming its own first-class citizen and becoming a top-level separate repository, and that will sort of help reduce the amount of code duplication that's happened over the past period of time, where people have, in order to not have a full dependency, they've ended up copying in portions of the code. And so several of the other projects have sort of committed to undoing that and going back to using just iMath with a separate repo. We have some performance improvements that we're hoping to release by SIGGRAPH, and we're always looking for new contributors. Carrie, was there anything I missed? Oh.
No, I think that covers it.
All right. Then I'll keep moving on then. I want to switch to sort of go back and ping pong between working groups and projects. And so the next one would be the diversity inclusion stuff. I see Carol in here, and I'd actually prefer if Carol talk to this because she does a way better job than I do in terms of talking through all of the initiatives and things that they have going on. So Carol, if you could say
Sure.
a few.
Yeah, thanks, Kimball. And thanks, Rob, for the introduction to the group earlier. It's been a whirlwind 6 months, plus a little bit more with this group. And we're really excited because we're finally launching a couple of initiatives that we've been working on for those 6 months. It was a lot of, and by the way, sorry, I should introduce myself. I'm Carol Payne. I work for Netflix as an imaging specialist, and I'm the co-chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Working Group with Rachel Rose, who's R&D supervisor at ILM. So I'm representing both of us today and our entire group of consistently about 25 to 30 people that we have in our monthly meetings that range from all different areas of the industry, from contributing developers to the ASWF projects, marketing, communications, HR. We have some people that have joined from universities that are interested in furthering open source efforts for their students. So it ranges from all of those things, and we're working on a couple things. High level, our goals are within the ASWF diversity and inclusion. So what can we be doing to look and be as diverse as the world is? And secondly, that ties into guidance from members. We have lots of great member companies that are all working hard on similar initiatives. How can we be on the same page and be a resource in that area for individuals and for companies? Thirdly, where a lot of the initiatives that we've been able to get off the ground lies in student education. We did some surveys early on asking folks in the group and the ASWF where they thought we should focus our efforts, and that primarily landed on investment in younger students, late high school, early college, of working to say, okay, let's introduce open source a little bit earlier and what it ties into our industry and visual effects, animation, and entertainment in general, and lay that foundation of you can get involved now, you can start using these tools that are open source now, and that we're launching that with our webinar series. It started February 25th. We've had 2 so far, and those are career focused. So we did an intro to ASWF and open source, and then we're focusing on different careers in our industry and sort of tying that back into how they use open source. So we're doing software developers, pipeline TDs, and color science is one, and a couple other things. And we hope to continue that initiative because we know we're only scratching the surface there. Working on a couple other things that are cool is open source framework. Adobe has some cool proposals that they're putting through, and we're going to work with them to make sure that framework, that could be just a whole framework for my company wants to do diversity and inclusion and make it more of a part of our holistic part of our company. How do we do that, and what is a framework with which we could start with, or just sanity check what we're doing in a lot of ways. And then scholarship and internship programs are sort of self-explanatory. I don't want to take too much time. I know we're a little bit, we've got a lot to cover today, but look forward to those this summer and for more info on all those initiatives soon. Thanks, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you, Carol. All right, I will continue onward. So the next project I want to mention is Open Shading Language. They are just now sort of going through the process, and they've officially transitioned over to the Academy Software Foundation GitHub. Some of the things that they're working on is OSL running on the GPU and merging in the Intel Pixar collaboration for batch SIMD processing, a bunch of other memory optimizations, just as a brief highlight of what they're looking at. And you'll see sort of I put the CLI best practices in here. That's something that we put in as a requirement for the projects is the CII badge thing, which it has a number of metrics in terms of good code management and so there's projects that have different statuses through that. Let me see that continue on. Next one I thought I'd mention is the USD Working Group. This one is sort of the goals around it are sort of more community focused than actually particularly project focused. As you know, the USD project's still quite active, thanks to Pixar. But we thought it would be really good to have a group that can help community members with issues and sort of help spread some of the knowledge base and best practices and these sorts of things. And so Corey from at Pixar helps run this, and the thing that they're actively doing is maintaining a wiki and knowledge base, and have a there have been some kind of neat things that have come out of this already. One of which is a super neat Jupyter Notebook integration with USD, so you can have sort of live web pages and interact with USD, which one of the guys contributed. And then it's also spawned some sub-working groups where various people are talking about cameras and rigs and schemas, and other people are talking about web visualization. And so it's starting to help grow a vibrant community where people can talk about their experiences. So that's pretty neat to see. Racing along, OpenVDB, and this one is quite active. I personally think they've been padding their numbers on the lines of code changed, but you know, I won't say anything. But no, I'm joking. But so they do a ton of work, and they've been really pioneering some of the build practices they have, and that other projects are learning from in terms of managing version symbols and these sorts of things to try to make the library more portable over time. But some of the technical goals that they're working on, you can see here, where there's a new nano VDB thing that is focused on the GPU, which Ken should be. I don't know if he's here, but he's working on that, and they're also been incorporating all of the AX stuff, which is again just another example where once VDB moved into the Academy Software Foundation, that neutral forum thing enabled other people to start contributing really neat tech to the project. And then they're also working on some other things around tiles and performance improvements and build processes. The CI group, Rob talked about a bit as being sort of a core tenet, and technically this isn't actually a working group right now, which is something that we're actually going to, I think, address here in the short term, and which will increase its visibility a little bit, but it is sort of a backbone component behind what a lot of the early days of the TAC were about. And the stated goals are sort of to share build scripts and recipes and all of these kinds of things, so that people can repeat this stuff to reduce duplicated effort, provide reference builds, and one of the things that we've been able to do as part of the ASWF is actually have a Docker Hub account such that we can avoid throttling. And I mention this only because when you have CI scripts where when you push a merge request, it runs the build and runs your unit tests, you can run into a scenario where your project actually being throttled because you're trying to download Docker containers to load your project dependencies. And so it's been really great to have our CI the CI builds run at full speed. And so that's great. And so more recently, some of the things I've been talking about are package dependency management, some of the studios sort of presenting what they have in that space, and looking at the impact of how the changes to the CentOS release model may impact that, and really trying to tie together with the VFX reference platform, and what the implications are of that, and so trying to provide active technical knowledge for making decisions around that. Next project to keep moving along, OpenColorIO. This project also has had a huge influx of support from Autodesk, coming on as a primary contributor and contributing an immense amount of code for version 2, whole new setup, and it's really quite impressive. They're working on all the ACES reference configs and studio configs, and really starting to work on the user experience. And one of the things that I thought I would spend just a brief second and talk about is the documentation and work that Autodesk, coming in as a DCC vendor, sort of values documentation and making that be a sort of a first-class part of the project. And so one of the things they did as part of this work was come up with a new system for blending, or at least maybe it's not new, but new to us anyway. Blending traditional Sphinx documentation with Doxygen documentation, and I hopefully this sort of isn't, the text is less important, but some of the real benefits of that is it really allows you to have a consistent documentation page where you can have stories and just traditionally written text intertwined with your actual API documentation, and as well as merging both the Python documentation and the C++ documentation. And so that's really exciting, and I know the other projects are looking at this stuff, and even some of the studios are saying, hey, that's a pretty neat pattern. Maybe we should adopt that internally too. And so that's a pretty neat innovation that they've done.
Kimball, if I can just jump in really quick, I just think this is a really nice story too. As you were pointing out, like EXR went through a period of less activity and now a lot more. And this is another example of a project that went through less activities, had key maintainers changed, and then even a handoff from one primary sponsoring company to another, and in a really successful, transparent way where I think everybody's getting a lot of value. So anyway, I just love the story of the success of OpenColorIO and the amount of innovation going into that has really been, I don't know if that would have happened without the work that the TAC had been doing, and everyone's confidence that this could be a nice smooth transition from 2 to 3. So anyway, just nice work on that, and I'm really glad to be able to celebrate that success.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Rob. So yeah, so the next up, I won't say too much about the review and approval working group. They're still talking to each other and working on identifying what it would mean to have a review and approval tool, or components of a tool that we could share amongst the studios and perhaps even the vendors, the DCC vendors. They've worked on a feature matrix and starting gap and impact analysis. And this is sort of a trend that you'll see, is where we're starting, the TAC is starting to talk about not only providing sort of core structural libraries, but maybe a little bit more production-oriented tools. It's a fine line to wend, but we're starting to look at that, and so that's pretty neat. OpenTimeline.io, which would obviously be a core component of that review and approval tool set, has been a recent addition to the Academy Software Foundation. Well, I guess it's been was it last SIGGRAPH got in, and they're working on a whole number of initiatives. Build consistency and cross-platform support is always a thing that all the projects are working on, but one of the things that OTIO is really, in a way, championing amongst our group of projects is really taking a look at multiple bindings for the library. So they have, they have a new C++ library that's kind of the back end, but they're looking at a new repository system to enable bindings to different languages to be and live on their own and manage that, which is pretty neat to see. And they're also working on new data models and continuing their CII badge progress, and graduating to be the full active project. Which sort of brings me to one of the other working groups, which is the Rust working group. This is a new working group that just got approved a couple weeks ago, I think, and it's an example where the individual projects may not have the bandwidth to support a binding to a particular other language, and so, but there's a lot of interest in that language in the community, and so they have sort of stepped up and said, hey, we'll help build some tooling to expose the C++ interfaces to Rust, and they're also going to help with sort of apparently not with typos, but they're going to help with conventions and consistent patterns. And so that will be really great to sort of have this working group to help coordinate across through the different projects and start to work on having sort of maybe a common binding framework such that we have more consistent exposure to Python or to Rust or to any of the other languages that people are using. OpenQ, yet another example of a project that spun out of our community and has been adopted and is sort of actively being maintained over at not a studio organization, primarily I guess the guys, Brian's over at Google, but they are, similar vein to some of the other projects where they're working on their the ASF project graduation, the CII badge progress, and they're nearly complete as well, and so we expect that to finish up here sometime early this year. But they're also really starting to look at user experience, UI revamp, and updating their documentation and doing a full refresh on that. And as always, working on interoperability with input and output growth, where they're working on different or updated DCC plugins or external services, reporting services, being able to talk to that. The next working group I wanted to mention is the Python 3 working group. And this one, it's currently a little bit quiet, although we expect that to pick up here again this year. But they've been focused on helping to provide a transition guide and coordinating efforts between the studios and the vendors, and really acting as a knowledge and experience sharing sort of center where people can come and finally get rid of Python 2 and switch to the new world, which we're going to be forced to do. But that's okay. It's a good thing. Change is good. And so nearly finished. But the newest project, which just got added, and so it hasn't made its way onto all the slides, is Ridasis. And as a side joke, I will note that this is the only project which doesn't have the word open in it. So I don't know how well it's going to be received, but no, this is basically an effort to revive another relatively dormant repository. The goal of it is to or the purpose of the tool is to be able to convert camera raw files to ACES spec files and do all the color manipulation necessary to do so. And one of Weta has agreed to contribute some of the code that we have from a tool that's internal. So we're going to use that to revive the repository. We don't have a logo yet, so we're going to have to work on that, which is one of the things that we can get benefit from. And this will also be another sort of multi-repository project, and so it's going to be an interesting thing to study. One is we want to make it a production quality tool, which will, of course, use OpenXR as a library, for example. But also, it will have camera data sets, and this may be almost as important as the tool itself in terms of helping to act as a common place for people to talk about the cameras and make sure that we have good color fidelity between all of them and how the IDTs get built to go into ACES and these sorts of things. So that's pretty exciting to have that on board, and we'll look to see that to grow over the next few months. And the final working group is the asset repository working group. It's also not quite an official working group yet, but we're about there. And its goals are for coming up, and you'll see the background here is the Disney Moana data, the Moana Island data set that Disney very graciously contributed to the world. And big, huge shout out to them, because it's serving as an example of the kind of thing that we're looking to do with this working group. And so we're working on a strategy for curating and hosting this, and hosting these kinds of things, and to not have it turning into a dumping ground. And so they're trying to figure out how to enable curated contribution, but also to seek out and beg for contribution, not beg, but encourage contribution, and sort of on multiple levels. One is an educational sort of entry level, and another one would be more complex or production grade examples of assets. And this, as a quick side note, sort of will benefit everyone if we can get a good framework like this set up and active. One, it'll help from a vendor perspective. It'll be amazing. It'll be data that's real data to use for testing, but it also will help the contributing organizations, because it means the software being written against it will be tested against real assets, and so that's also a huge benefit, and so on. And so with that, I think I'll wrap up and stay on schedule, or we'll head unless there's any other questions. Maybe we can sort of open it up to general QA and open discussion. I'll hand it back to David.
Thank you, Kimball. At this point, if there is any questions for Kimball in the long list of projects and activities that the TAC has been moving forward in the last year, that will be the time to ask in a more free-form fashion before we move to the polling, where we will ask you some more specific questions about the future. But now, if there's any question about what you've heard now, question, concerns, we really want this to be with our group of friends here, people who we trust. Don't hesitate to speak up your mind, or if you have a question about what you've heard, please go ahead.
And feel free to ask in the chat or just unmute and chime in, whatever you're most comfortable with.
I'll just amplify what Kimball said. Those of you who are here from film studios, please think hard about what assets you wish your software vendors had tested against before they sent you that last version of the software that you had to test. And think about whether there's something that you could contribute to the asset repository that would help both the open source projects and the software vendors and the research community, for that matter, to serve you better.
A really important pitch, because the existence or non-existence of this project is really going to depend on whether there's meaningful contributions.
And I'll just share as well, from Disney Animation, we shared the Moana Island scene, and although it was some work to do that, it's definitely been, more than paid for itself in terms of all the reciprocal optimizations and examples and that kind of that's come back to us, and it's been a great advantage to us to have technology companies and software vendors and researchers going out and doing work directly based on kind of something that's derived from our real production data. So it's not just an altruistic thing. It's been beneficial to us too. But it's also, we did it because we wanted to give back to the community too. We're certainly benefiting from it.
Thanks, Nick.
I'll just add from the Open Timeline.io perspective, like having our project join the ASWF has been a really fantastic experience, and specifically the sort of outreach and just visibility that the project has received because of joining the ASWF. We have contributions from lots and lots of people that we otherwise would not even know that they existed. So that's been great.
I'd like to give a plug for an upcoming post on the ASWF blog that Emily Olin commissioned about the origins of OpenEXR. It's largely interviews with Florian Kainz and Rod Bogart about the inception of OpenEXR at ILM in the late 90s. It tells the story of the development of the library, but also of the adoption of floating point representations of images, which we take for granted now, but at the time in the 90s was kind of a radical notion. So it's an interesting bit of history to capture. So stay tuned for that on the blog.
Just even more color to add to the DNI section that Carol and Rachel are heading up. Our member organizations all have pretty vibrant, or either have or developing pretty vibrant DNI inclusion efforts. So I think David may talk about this in a little bit too, or maybe we'll have some discussion around it, but it sure is exciting to see this forum being used as a place where successes and techniques and processes that people are using or identifying internally that need to be revised can be shared, so that it will help accelerate everyone's efforts in that area. So I really like that, and it's a possible idea for further development. So I think it may be a point of discussion a little bit later too.
Any other questions, comments on the great work of the TAC? Okay. We can move into the Q&A and open discussion. So